to slavery, to Jim Crow laws, Japanese internment camps, to the civil rights movement. There is a lot to dismantle. We are still in the process of it hundreds of years later. Today we have Dr. Devon Wright with us from the MSU Denver. He's a doctor and he's an assistant professor of Africana Studies at the school. He researches racism and social movements. Thank you so much for being here this morning.
Hello, good morning. How are you doing?
Thank you. I'm doing well. Let's get right to it. Let's talk about this most recent movement that we are seeing right now, Black Lives Matters. Where did this come from? What's inspired this so far?
Of course, throughout American history, there's been a long experience of protest. The United States itself began as a protest movement with the Boston Tea Party, led to the American Revolutionary War. As far as the African-American experience is concerned, there's been an aspect of African-American culture that has been focused on liberation, right? Although the United States itself was born with the notion of liberty and freedom and equality, African-Americans have ever been systematically disenfranchised from the American democratic experience. So the Black Lives Matter movement that we're seeing today, which I would say really began approximately 2013 with the acquittal of George Zimmerman, that's when the hashtag Black Lives Matter was created. That is a part of a longer tradition in the American experience that stretches, yes, back to the post-World War II civil rights era, back to the abolitionist movement era, and back to the American Revolutionary War era.
What, in your opinion, are we seeing right now? Is this going to be one of those moments like a Martin Luther King moment, a Malcolm X moment? How do you see what's happening right now?
I'm not sure that if you want to call this current era of protest that we're in, the Black Lives Matter era, I'm not sure that there's a singular central leader that speaks on behalf of the movement with one voice. Perhaps we can say the same thing about the civil rights movement in the post-World War II era. Although Martin Luther King and other figures, Malcolm X perhaps on the Black Power movement side, became central voices in the civil rights struggle. But this more recent Black Lives Matter era is much more youth driven. Of course, we have to contextualize it in the global information age where information is shared instantaneously over the internet. That's why the death of George Floyd was found out about so quickly and radicalized people so quickly. So it's much more dispersed. It's much more decentralized. It's much more asymmetrical. There are prominent voices that have emerged over the years in the 2014 Ferguson, Missouri protests since then. But, it's much more decentralized in comparison to this post-World War II civil rights era.
How much of an impact do you feel that there is on technology right now? We're capturing a lot of these moments on video. We have cell phones now. There's cameras everywhere. How much of that is playing into these movements that we're seeing right now?
It's interesting you ask about the technological question. I see parallels between this Black Lives Matter movement era and the post-World War II civil rights era. Relatively new media technology had come on the scene, had become more ubiquitous, had become more widely available to the American consumer, which helped to disseminate instances of injustice, of police brutality, of racial violence. So if you go back to the post-World War II civil rights era, the lynching of Emmett Till was captured with the permission of his mother, Mamie Till, who insisted on an open casket funeral. Jet magazine was in attendance at the funeral. They took photographic images, they disseminated it. During the height of the civil rights movement protest era, police dogs being sicked on protesters, fire hoses being sicked on protesters, all of that was caught on local news, on national news, so that Americans could consume it on the 3 major television stations at the time. So in this 21st century Black Lives Matter movement era, cell phone camera, smartphone camera technology, similar to the television, is helping to distribute, to disseminate instances of injustices, police brutality. In the instance of Ahmaud Arbery, white vigilantes acting on behalf of what they imagine to be their role in the community to police it. All of these instances of injustices are being captured on people's smartphones, and they're being distributed at a much more instantaneous rate than in the post-World War II civil rights era.
Such an interesting conversation and topic, and we could talk about this for hours, I know, but we have to let you go. But thank you so much, Devon Wright, for coming on today. We appreciate your insight. We're going to send it over to Marty.
Thank you for having me.
The forecast.